Just so cool. All right, so I'd like to welcome James Staltari, who will be delivering to us his Agile Transformation Playbook. So James has delivered a number of successful transformations, and he's also currently working at Sime Darby, hopefully I pronounced that correct, which is also known as Hastings Deering. And so he's going to take us through some of the tips and tricks and traps on his Agile transformation journey. We're dividing it up into a 40-minute presentation, 20 minutes of breakout session, and then in addition to that, 15 minutes of questions at the end. So I will hand over to James. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for committing, or thank you for your time this evening. As John said, I've been fortunate enough to lead several large-scale digital transformations across some well-known brands, including Westpac, the Westpac Group across its retail brands, which have included Westpac, St. George, Bank of Melbourne, Bank of South Australia, but also Virgin Australia. Locally, I've done some consulting with Sun Super and also one of Australia's largest FX payment providers, OFX. I've spent a little bit of time in the startup space, not a lot, but I have done some work there. And more recently, as John alluded to, I'm leading a digital transformation with a Malaysian multinational called Sime Darby. Here in Queensland, we operate under Hastings Deering, and we're the third or fourth largest Caterpillar dealership in the world. And Sime Darby also owns around 100 car dealerships across Asia Pacific as well, and some of which are local in Brisbane, including Brisbane BMW, Westside BMW, and they typically specialise in a lot of luxury car brands as well. What I'm looking at sharing with you this evening is my experience and insights and some tips around leading successful transformations. Much of what I'm going to be talking about this evening is my first-hand experience, my encounters of what's worked and also what hasn't worked. There's been plenty of that along the way as well, and how best to overcome what I think are some common challenges that we face in all organisations, irrespective of size. I'll try and provide some as many examples as possible, but certainly feel free to chime in if there's any. If you want to ask questions along the way, feel free to do so. We'll also have some time at the end as well. So there's really three topics I'd like to cover this evening, and one of which is, or the first one is the Agile Transformation Playbook. What are the key ingredients to a successful transformation? The second is overcoming the frozen layer. And what I mean by that is there's always a frozen layer in every organisation. There's that layer of resistance somewhere. So how do you overcome that? And then I'd like to close with some tips and tricks in helping you make your transformational program a success. And certainly if time permits, we'll close with an interactive activity, which will give everyone an opportunity to provide some feedback of their experiences or perhaps where you're looking for some help in overcoming some challenges that you may be facing today. So in terms of the Agile Transformation Playbook, it's effectively, this in my mind is the top 5 ingredients you need for a successful transformation. It's a bit like a recipe. You know, you can't just put in, if the recipe requires 5 things and you put in 3, you know, your cake or whatever you're baking or making isn't quite going to be right. And in my experience, it's these 5 things that are really necessary and prerequisites to set yourself up for success. Now, before we dive into it, one thing I would say is underpinning this playbook is the assumption that the pre-work of the why has been completed. Why are we doing a transformation? What does success look like? What are the strategic priorities for the organization or the group that you're working in that wants to that you want to deliver? I mean, Agile at the end of the day is a mechanism or a mechanism to deliver. So we have to have done the work of understanding the why we want to transform. So in terms of the 5 key elements to a successful transformation, the first one is having cross-functional or multidisciplinary teams. You really need all the required expertise to take something from ideation to customer facing in your team. And without that, you're really going to struggle. So you would need to look beyond those organizational structures, because often these resources will sit in different teams or different divisions, or even in some large organizations, different businesses. You're only as good as your weakest link, and I'm sure you'll hear me talk about that a little bit further. And in my experience, I would often, I mean, there's a lot of schools of thought to talk about your teams or your squads should only be as big as a team that could eat 2 pizzas. In my experience, I would take a bigger team with the required resources that you need to get from ideation to customer facing than a smaller team that can eat 2 pizzas but not have the required disciplines and skills. The bigger the team, obviously it does become more wieldy or unwieldy, should I say. And it's often an indictment of the organization's processes. In my, the biggest organization I've led a program in is the Westpac group. Some of our squads were sort of 15 people plus. And that was a reflection of all the processes and handoffs we had. And we actually worked to resolve and improve that and got those team sizes down to a manageable level by actually empowering others within the team to make decisions on behalf of others. But that multidisciplinary team is absolutely key. The second component is ensuring that those resources are dedicated to your must-win battle. So whatever strategic priority that you've identified or the business has identified, the resources that you've identified must be dedicated to that. This can't be an extracurricular thing that they do on top of their day job. This is their day job. And you really need a mechanism to address that if that becomes an issue. Because often what we'll find is there may be resistance to contribute those resources to the program, or when they are there, their other responsibilities haven't been relinquished. So you really need to work hard to ensure that you've got at least 80–90% of those people's capacity dedicated to that team. And of course, all of those members of that team need an aligned goal. It shouldn't be the goal of their home business. It should be that goal of that strategic priority or that must-win battle that the program's identified. That's absolutely critical that, and I'll talk further about this, that all the members of the team have a common and aligned goal. So they share in that success, they have a shared North Star that they're working towards. The fourth element is co-location, and if there's one item on the screen that's really been challenged in recent times, it is this, but it's still a necessary ingredient or component of your success. You really want to ensure that there is that co-location or these resources are embedded. And I know it's not always possible for resources to be physically co-located, but there's also a concept of virtual co-location, and that is these teams have to be forming and bonding together and be embedded together as a team. You don't want individuals sitting back in their home business if they're forming part of a squad that is driving a transformation. So physically, if you have the luxury of physical co-location, ensuring that there is that shared space, because a lot of your decisions and collaboration will come from impromptu conversations. It won't come from dedicated meetings. In fact, I would try and alleviate those as much as possible. So it's that collaboration, spontaneous and ongoing collaboration where you'll make decisions, find out information, and it gives everyone an opportunity to be more curious than waiting for a meeting, a structured meeting. In the case of the virtual sense, obviously we're all using a series of collaboration tools that enable this, but again, there's still the requirement for all of these multidisciplinary teams to be embedded and bonding together and working towards a common cause. So we all have to work a bit harder in that virtual context, but you need to preserve that co-location and collaboration where we're having to forced to work in a virtual sense. And probably lastly, but certainly not least important, if not the most important, is ensuring that you've got executive sponsorship. You really want to ensure that the executive have bought in, endorsing, and are committed to those must-win battles that you're setting your teams to embark on and deliver. That's really important, particularly as you come up against barriers across your program. That exec sponsorship is critical. And the other item you need to ensure is that you preserve that sponsorship. And one of my favorite ceremonies is ensuring that we have regular executive stand-ups, where the program and each of our teams is presenting back to the executive in a stand-up fashion what the teams have delivered, what they're working on next, how they're performing as a team in terms of and how they're performing against the business goals, but also what help do they need to perform better. And in my experience, I've not had an executive group that has not loved that because it's not a steering committee they have to go to with a polished PowerPoint deck. It's literally a stand-up, and the teams are presenting their work to execs, and execs can actually in real time be solving problems for the team. And it's really creating that servient culture where the execs are working for the team rather than the team working for the execs. And it's a really important dynamic, and I think it's pretty, execs love it, and it's really important to have that sponsorship because you always come up against challenges in the program, and having those advocates for your program is really, really important. The frozen layer. As I said, there's always resistance in every company. You have whether it be your naysayers or people who are reluctant to change or insistent that they got to continue working in the way that they've always worked. Overcoming that, like ice, the thicker this layer is, the harder it is to break. But it always does exist in some way, shape, or form. And that exec sponsorship is really key in helping break through that ice. And obviously, the lower that ice is in the organisation, the easier it is to overcome. But often, in my experience, it's the middle management layer is where that frozen layer often is. And it's often the resources from that middle management layer that you're wanting to tap into in order to drive your program or have embedded into those cross-functional teams. My advice and guidance here, or my first-hand experience, is understand the goals, priorities, and even KPIs of those areas that are frozen. You have no way through that ice. I mean, you can crack through it with a sledgehammer, or you can partner with those teams and understand their resistance, or most importantly, understand their goals and priorities. And obviously find that win-win scenario with them. A good example that I'd use here is, again, if I refer to the Westpac group, the program we were running, we had a mandate from our CEO to get to 40% of the bank's product sales across all retail products through the digital channel. At the time, we were at 8%, so it was a massive multi-year program. Now, the challenge we had, that was very much a volume-driven game to get from 8% of product sales to 40%. And my colleagues that were running the actual individual products, be it savings accounts, credit cards, home loans, personal loans, etc., their priorities and KPIs were very much value-driven, and it was around balance sheet. It was around the value that was, the value of the deposits in those credit cards, or the value of the debit on the credit cards and home loans, etc. They were managing the balance sheet for the bank. So we had this conundrum where we were driving volume and they were looking for value. And there was some real hesitance for them to contribute resources into the program. But there was no way through that other than to ensure the program could also look at value metrics as well as volume. And before long, once we started demonstrating the value of those deposits that we were collecting, or the loans that we were generating, the level of buy-in and collaboration just actually accelerated. And we were able to break through a lot of myths and preconceptions of the channel in which, the digital channel, that it was low value. And in fact, we demonstrated that some of the value, particularly in savings products that were originated through digital, were actually of higher balances than our physical channels. So we wouldn't have been able to be successful if we didn't understand and understand those priorities of some of our peer groups. And most of all, use that playbook, use those key components in order to break through that layer. So what I'd like to do now is cover off around 6 or 7 key tips and tricks to make your transformation a success. And these are from my key learnings over time. The first one is getting the foundation right. First and foremost, think playbook as your entry criteria. Don't embark on a transformation unless you've got those 5 key ingredients in place to start with. That is your entry criteria. In fact, even if you're expanding a program, consider that playbook necessary if you're moving from 6 teams to your 7th or 8th team, use that playbook as your entry criteria to either create or expand your program. You can't flick a switch and be agile. I've certainly heard a lot of senior people and executives in particular talk about, agile is a buzzword and let's become agile. It's actually not something you can just become at a flick of a switch. I think the other key foundation is you can't do agile on an island. It can't just be within one team, within one business. If you're really wanting to transform an organization, you're actually transforming your customer experience. And most customers will traverse across many departments within an organization to consume the product or service that organization offers. So it requires an all of organization effort to transform the organization. So you're only as good as that weakest link, in that if you're missing that expertise in your teams, it's really going to slow down your ability to drive change or really impact your velocity and flow. So you really want to ensure you've got the foundation right, and it's a all of business transformation. It's not one that's led by, it's not an engineering transformation or a marketing transformation. Reality is it requires those multidisciplinary capabilities. Being pragmatic or taking a pragmatic approach to Agile is absolutely key. Pragmatic over purist frameworks. I think dealing with things sensibly and reliably in a way that's based on practical rather than theoretical considerations is an absolute must. Don't do things because it's in the Agile manifesto. You do need to ensure that you've got key frameworks in place, but you don't need to be perfect to get started. So I've certainly dealt with a number of coaches and facilitators, and some that are really just purists are probably the ones that I haven't had much time for or haven't had much success with. It's the people in the program that can adapt and build the frameworks that are best fitting for your organization and your business. Do have your starting frameworks. Two that I would suggest that are absolutely key is a framework for estimating work and a framework for prioritizing work are absolutely key. They would be part of your not negotiables as part of your entry criteria. And hold on to the foundations that are important. Your Agile ceremonies are really, really important. As I said, use, even in the context of that executive stand-up, that's a ceremony that you won't necessarily see in an Agile manifesto, but it's something that categorically works, and I've certainly used in my experience across different organisations, and it's something that I'll hold on to and ensure that we put in place across different organisations. Club versus country. I might just give a bit of explanation to what I mean by this. I think most people like a sporting analogy, and that's precisely what this is. So if I look at it as professional sportsmen or professional sportswomen, they often represent a club. And while they're representing that club, the strategic priorities, the practices, the plays, the strategy is all about that club strategy. However, if that person is fortunate enough to represent their country, those club priorities get put on hold temporarily, and they move into a camp, typically a camp, where you're physically co-located, and that sports person is embedded with similar like-minded people that are focused on a common strategy, a set of common plays, and a strategy set out by their coach or that leadership group. And a transformation program is no different. We need to really move away from departmental goals into enterprise and organizational priorities. Hence that executive sponsorship is key to ensure that we can move from club to country. The reason I call this out is using this analogy is something that, in my experience, when you communicate this to people, it could be at that frozen layer or that executive layer or your peer group, they get it. They get the concept of that club versus country sporting analogy. So use that if you like, obviously, but it's something that I've had some success in particularly in people understanding why we need dedicated and cross-functional teams. Sorry, I'm just moving between split screens, so if I'm stalling a little there. Facts are our friends. Data trumps intuition. So many times we have a tendency to be focusing on pet projects. They who shouts the loudest gets work done, or even relying on intuition. And I think we really need to radically reframe the questions that we ask as leaders of programs to ensure that we're really relying on the data. Because we often will find the data will tell a different story, or at least support the story that individuals believe is the right direction. So many times I've seen myths or intuitions broken down by the data. One of the things I love seeing when I go into an organization is tenure. If there's strong tenure, it's a great reflection of the commitment that individuals have for an organization. I still believe that's also a good reflection of the organization. But what I do find with tenure is people get stuck. They've heard something many years ago and they've stuck to it, and it's become embedded in concrete and true. And tenure often relies on a lot of intuition or mistruths. So debunk those mistruths with data, and identify the things that you need to measure. And by measure, I mean day in, day out, because what gets measured will get done. And I think a sign of a really strong agile team is one that knows the data of their business, be it customer facing or internal facing, external facing. That business runs on data, and the most strongest teams will have the strongest analytical skills that they're looking and analysing that data and pulling the insights from that. Pausing to move faster. Teams have a tendency, we all do, we all have a tendency to want to deliver stuff. And it's imperative, I think, that you set a clear direction for the team. But it's really important that the teams stop starting and start finishing. I would much prefer to see teams having a smoother delivery than a rapid and inconsistent delivery any day of the week. So slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that's absolutely critical when it comes to, particularly if you're forming a program or forming new teams, get them to pause for a moment, be clear on what the vision and goal of that team is or of the program, and get them to reset. So they're all marching towards the same target and they know what good looks like. In the case of our current program, we've actually paused and have invested in a 6 to 8 week discovery period where we're giving those teams time to actually go speak to our customers, both internal customers and external customers, and undertake a full discovery process to put ourselves in our customers' shoes and understand the problems of our customers that they're looking for us to solve, rather than relying on that intuition of what we think customers want. I'm a big fan of the double diamond framework. And while that's a design framework, I think that holds true to pausing to move faster. And that framework is about understanding the right thing and then building it right or designing it right. And that holds true in this case. Pause, reset, and then fire. Embracing your ignorance. look, you won't have all the answers. No one does. Being agile is about getting started, and as I said a little while ago, don't worry about having the perfect frameworks in place. Make sure you've got your key frameworks, but not everything has to be in place to get started. One of my favorite sayings from a mentor of mine was, think big, start small, and then scale fast. And I think that really holds true. When you've done that strategic thinking, or the why, that's obviously quite a big picture. You don't necessarily have to tackle all of those must-win battles in your first horizon. Break that down, start with a couple of teams or one or two teams, prove out that way of working, get some runs on the board, and then scale that using your playbook. You don't have to go with big bang. In fact, most big bangs have a big pop. You know, that can be incredibly dangerous. So test, learn, optimize. I think that is the best approach when tackling an agile transformation. And guys, lastly, is win-win-win. And this isn't about, it's not about winning at all costs. In fact, it's about ensuring that you build advocates as you're building an agile transformation, and to ensure that everyone is winning. You need to ensure the program's winning, your partners are winning, and your people are winning. So that's your customers, the business, and the team. There has to be a win for everyone for you to be successful, and that's how you'll help build that advocacy in the organization. I think a good measure of success is you often start to see, or hopefully you'll see, the transformation is moving from a pull to a push. And what I mean by that is, in the early stages where you're trying to build those cross-functional teams, it's often like pulling teeth, getting people to contribute resources to your cause. But over time, as you progress and deliver value, you will find that people will observe what you're doing, and that work is being done and things are being done, and it's being done efficiently and effectively, and they'll actually be willing to contribute resources. To me, there's a couple of measures of success. This is certainly one where you see the organization moving from pull to push. One in the organization where I'm leading a transformation at the moment, I'm actually seeing some of my peer group actually sending their leadership group to some of our ceremonies to actually, so they can, we can educate their teams on what good looks like. So that's really flattering, but we're starting to see that push rather than that pull. I think the other key success for me is the team. I'm a big advocate for ensuring that we measure team health, and we do that as part of every sprint. And that's actually seeing how well the team are operating together as a group, but also how well our processes are supporting them to deliver the work that they need to deliver. And that's a really good mechanism to really measure the health of your program, because at the end of the day, it's the health of those teams that is going to drive the health of your program. It is a movement. I think if you can see that there's you're creating a movement in the organization, that's a really positive sign that you are making that change, that positive change. Just in closing, my final comment would be, every digital transformation is as much a cultural transformation as it is a digital. one. And changing culture isn't easy, nor is it quick. You have to be patient, you have to be resilient, and most of all, you have to be adaptive. So, folks, that's my overview. I might pause there if there's any pressing questions, and then we can move into a quick activity.
So, James, I think there was one question from Mike Stars in the chat where he said, "What is a good framework to introduce a team new to this way of working to estimations and building their confidence and accuracy in doing them?"
Cool. Look, there's many frameworks. Probably the two frameworks, and I mentioned them, that I suppose I hold close into the programs that I've been involved in and led. The one on estimation, I'm certainly a fan of the Fibonacci sequence as a simple and easy way to embed into your planning and estimation process. So using planning poker and using Fibonacci as a mechanism. I find it simple for people to understand. It's a bit of fun as well. And you can also challenge without having conflict because you can help. It really helps initiate those conversations. And it's always surprising when you are estimating, and I've seen this so many times where you might be estimating a piece of work, and it is so it might seem obvious to everyone, yet you've got someone in the group that's sizing that a 3 and someone else sizing that as a 21, and the significant perception differences of what you think is a standard piece of work, and that helps have a conversation, and it helps enable different disciplines within your team to actually have a conversation and help upskill others and influence others to come to a common landing. So estimating, planning poker and Fibonacci is one, and then prioritization. I'm a big fan, and I know some people aren't, but weighted shortest job first is certainly one that has brought about success for me. Okay, was there any other questions?
There was one more in the chat from Joe. She said, "How do you measure team health each sprint?"
So team health, we have a couple of in fact, one or two questions of how well do you think we've operated how well have we operated as a team, and how well are our processes supporting the team, or our frameworks and processes. Really simply, some of the best and easiest ways I've seen the teams measure this in their retro is on a fist of 5. So on a count of 3, on a score of 1 to 5, 1, let's face it, we really sucked and we didn't do well as a team. 5, we smashed the lights out. And just by taking an average of those scores, it could be as simple as that, and that could be done in a 30 to 40 second exercise. We're currently using electronic or a digital tool to do that, but it's following the same simple approach.
Let's keep the remaining questions, I think, till afterwards, because I think otherwise we're not going to have enough time for the exercise. We do have some question time available after.
Cool. So I'm just going to pop a Miro link in the chat. Hopefully you can see that, and if people could go to that would be great. So the exercise that I thought we could run is we'll break out, once people are in the Miro board, you can see in the center of the board, I've got the playbook as I talk through. And in a moment, we're going to break people out into groups of 4 or 5 people in each group. And that group will have a number. And if you could just move to that number on the Miro board and have a conversation with your group and share perhaps some of your war stories and experiences, discussing what's worked and what has not worked in either a program that you're involved in now or in the past. And talk about where things have either not gone to plan, or think about where things have not gone to plan, and whether anything in the playbook would have helped you. So if we can break out for 5 minutes into those groups, each of the groups can have a discussion, and then we'll come back and maybe share 2 or 3 of those stories back to the main group.
Sorry, James, before we do that, a number of people are having trouble accessing the board because of a permission error requesting access. So I'm not sure if you've got a panel.
So you might need to hit the share button there in Miro there, James, just on your top right, with the blue button. And then from there, you should be able to copy the board link and change your permissions so anyone can open with the link.
Can edit maybe.
Yeah.
Can somebody try again now?
I think you'd have to post that new link into the chat.
Sure.
Yeah, it's working now by the looks of it. I can get in now.
Awesome.
Okay, I'll repost a link just in case.
No, thanks, Will.
No worries.
It works, but we can
Sure,
only add comments and not add new postage, but only comments.
So, Martin,
I don't seem to be able to turn it to where everybody can edit. I can put it for everybody can view, everybody can comment, or no access. Those are the options I get for anybody with the link.
So comments can be enough.
Yeah, we can add comments.
Okay, if that'll work.
Cool. All right, so James, you want us into groups of?
We've still got. We've
got 25 here, so it should be do groups of 5.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Maybe around 5 groups of 5, Michael.
Yep. I'll set that up now, and we'll automatically create the rooms.
So Michael, just before you do that,
Yep.
James, you want us to go to the number that matches the number of our room?
Yeah, so Michael, just confirming those groups will be numbered.
Yes, they will be numbered, each room.
And then if each group moves to that number on the Miro board, and they can use stickies and notes and share. The exercise is about, first and foremost, discussing what has worked and what has not worked in programs that they've been involved in, and where things have not gone to plan. Would have the playbook helped in addressing some of those challenges?
Cool.
Any questions before we start?
Sorry, just one comment from my side is that we will be, at the moment it's now 6 minutes to 8. So is everyone comfortable that this exercise can extend a little bit beyond the 8 p.m. The 8 p.m. time? Cool.
Thumbs up.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
So
Right.
why don't we group back together into the main room at 8 o'clock, and we can pick up a couple of groups who want to share those stories.
Brilliant.
Cool.
All right.
I like your closing, Paul.
What was that, John?
I was just commenting on Paul's clothing. It looks like you'll certainly be warm in this weather. And it looked like a picture of from the Napoleonic era.
James, you're on mute if you're speaking. But welcome back, everybody.
Thank you. Why don't we take a couple of minutes to just do a quick round the grounds. We'll start with, I think did Michael just confirm we had 4 groups looking at the board? Is that correct?
Sorry, I did the same thing. We've got 5 rooms.
5
So
rooms.
5 groups.
So let's start with room number 1. Does anyone who was in room number 1 want to share one of the stories or any common themes that came out of that discussion?
So I'll jump in. We spent most of the time talking about executive support, executive sponsorship, and on the one hand, that it makes a huge difference if you've got it. On the other hand, it's insufficient on its own, especially if executives aren't doing the transformation themselves or committed to the values of whatever they're pushing. But a really important point that came up alongside this was that if it's not enough to talk about agile transformation as if you've started A and end at B. This is more like an ongoing evolution and changing the mindset to, instead of, okay, we've arrived, we're now agile, to how are we continuing to be agile? How are we evolving this? Marcin, Kanacha, I hope I represented you accurately.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks, Arthur. I think it's a really good point in that, we know that agile is a buzzword, and a lot of people, particularly executives, will just use it freely or out of context in terms of the way in which we work. But it's a great opportunity for them to see it, to then feel it, to then believe it. And I think if you've got those regular check-ins and showing them, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a way of working. And if they can see, whether it's called agile or anything else, if they can actually see that the teams are working collaboratively and effectively and seeing the outputs, that's the value and the buy-in, or how you'll get the buy-in from those executives. I think that's a really good point. In the interest of time, I'm going to just select a couple other groups and then be respectful of people's time. And I'm going to pick on group 5 because looking at the Miro board, you've created some nice little post-its and some commentary there. So group 5, do you want to share a bit about your discussion and whether there was any key themes?
No, I was a scribe, so that means I can't present as well, right? That would be wrong.
So
might be the last man standing, Will.
No, that's fine. I think we were all politely waiting for the other people to jump in. So we came up with four key things, and I think the one item that we really resonated on was the lack of understanding that it's a cultural change. I think that's probably the big one from my side, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and saying that you if you don't really understand what's involved in cultural change, then that's going to be a major pitfall for you in your agile transformation.
Yeah, great point. And cultures, it's a hard thing to change. It takes time and energy, and there's no set way to change it. It's different in every organization too. But knowing that you need to do that, at least you're partway there by chipping away at that. Cool, thanks, John. And might do one more. And group number 3, you also had some commentary there, and I think that was, you were part of that one, Nash.
Yes, I was, but I think some good points were made by Joe, Ash, Ellie, and Jacob. But I think one of the big ones was around adaptation and pivoting required regularly. Because Joe's on a 2-year transformation with 15,000 people going agile, and that's extremely large. So the ability to be able to pivot and change, I think, is was quite important. That was a good point. I think Jacob's experience, we won't talk about HR and finance being the key issues, but it was around smaller projects, plans agile works really well, but larger ones have more hurdles, and I think that's where it is. But a very good point raised was around changing process to suit agile, because sometimes it's almost like process stays the same, but the rest of the organization is going down an agile pathway.
Yeah, right. I think there's two common themes there for me, as you talked about sort of finance and HR, and then processes. It's often hard to get commitment for dedicated resources when you actually need, you couldn't justify a dedicated finance person or a HR person in a team. But often they've got very stringent processes. So an experience that I had in one organization, we had it was a very tight regulatory environment, and we had operational risk, compliance, legal, that required sign-offs before we could release certain work. And it was impossible to ask for a resource from each of those areas. So one of the things we did do is we asked each of those areas to come together and empower one of those areas to make decisions on behalf of the other areas. So we could nail it down to one person that the team could work with, and that person would liaise with those other areas as required, but they were empowered to make those decisions. And then we actually created what we called a signing ceremony. So that individual, again, while they couldn't commit 100% of their time in the team, we agreed 3 times a week for 2 hours, blocks of 2 to 3 hours, where they would be physically co-located with the team, and the team could take their work up to them for sign-off from a compliance and legal perspective. And the reason I tell this story is it was one that sort of helped break down those barriers. But what happened really quickly is that individual went, actually, I really like being here, and I'm now hearing the work that you guys are working on next. And actually, can I base myself here and do my day job from here, because it's great if I can hear what you're working on next, and I can be part of those conversations, and I can be involved in the design stage, not just the final release and sign-off stage. And it really changed that culture. So one, we changed the process. Two, we changed the culture. And most importantly, we improved rapidly improved the velocity of sign-offs. So it can be done. It's not always easy, but yeah, I think that's perhaps a good example of where we've faced similar challenges. Okay, so just before we call it a wrap, and just last opportunity to have any other questions or comments. Otherwise, I'll give people back their Thursday evening, or John, will hand over back to yourself for any closing comments or remarks.
Yeah, I've got a comment. Is if you look at the group 4 and 5, in group 5, it's got an item up there, try to do entire org at one time, and executives got cold feet, too hard, expensive, etc. Embrace your ignorance. And I think it's group 4, says implementing agile ways of working at departmental level does not work, which is quite interesting in that sense, which I think is, shows a little bit the challenges in some of these that people that have experienced they're taking different approaches, and they have different effects on different organizations.
Super interesting. I think a lot of that comes down to what James was talking about with the pragmatic approach, though. It's fitting the right thing for the org. All orgs are different. Yeah. They're you know, no two systems are the same.
That's the Shuhari thing. It's not just about taking the thing and just painting by numbers. It's having the intelligence to know where to apply specific things dependent on the conditions on the ground.
Yeah, really good comments.
So I'll keep the question time open for a bit, but perhaps just to say that from my side, I found that the session was gold. It was what I really enjoyed about it is that the James, your presentation was really practical, and was the clarity was incredible. So it was a thing of saying these are the key things to focus on, and really clearly presented so that we can go. I can see immediately that if you go off track with any of these things, then that can be a disaster for your agile transformation. So, and it's so easy to skip one of them without realizing it. So having that list of tips and tricks in the playbook and breaking the frozen layer, I think is I found it incredibly valuable. So thank you.
Thank you, John, and thanks for everyone for their time on a Thursday night.
Yeah, cool. So I'll throw the floor back to for everyone for questions, and I think we'll keep it open for maybe another 10 minutes or so. I think Micah was saying that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? I think that might have been a comment to something that was spoken about a little bit earlier.
If by breakfast you mean 16 coffees, then I agree.
I was going to type a comment in there, burn the boats. We're not turning around if executives are going to commit.
Yeah, I think on the executive commitment, it is important that you get that. And if they do, perhaps one way to address that cold feet is starting, thinking big and starting small. Because if you can deliver value and put some warmth around their feet, they will commit more investment. So I think it's about demonstrating, getting runs on the board, demonstrating success, and then certainly going back for more investment or that next team, etc. So looking at it progressively or by horizons is a good way to avoid that cold feet syndrome.
That's definitely how we're doing it. We started with some front runner teams to prove that it could work and got that success and momentum, and then allowed functions to buy in when it was the right time for them. So you have some early adopters coming in early and execs accepting it and rolling out our ways of working within their functions. And then gradually over the 2 years, we've moved and always had that executive support. So it's been, you know, things have been tough at times. Not everyone's agreed, but you know, work through it and you change it up a bit as you go.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Not for the faint-hearted, is it?
Yeah, no, you buy into a long journey. Yeah. But it's a journey that will evolve. So we'll get to the end point and then we'll have to look at the next evolution of it.
And also not to lose sight, we can criticize, executives and other parts of the organization, but we're also asking for a lot as well. We're asking for resources, we're asking for investment. And it's often, I find teams or programs lose sight of that. So it's recognizing, the investment that is being made and finding that, that X factor or exponential return on that investment. That's really important to keep check of that. Knowing your burn rate from a expenditure perspective per sprint, your cost per sprint, I think is a great thing to know, because your teams should know or should be on the hook for delivering 2x, 3x, 10x on that investment.
I think the other hope you have is that your executive that's committed to it remains stable as you go through it. Because if you get a whole executive change, everything can change.
Yeah, you definitely need more than one advocate.
It's not easy to control that part, though.
No.
So any further questions?
Just, I've got one, James, is around the role of the product owner in a team, and getting those people available or helping the business, especially if it's a joint exercise that we're working on. And it sometimes needs a reorganisation in the operational areas to free up those people. How have you dealt with some of those challenges?
Yeah, look, I think there's two factors there. It's freeing up, finding the capacity, and then the second is, and this actually came up in our group. I think it was group 4. Was around the mindset of individuals in the team. But Pushpa actually was talking about a scenario or experience she'd had where the mindset of the product owner was just lagging, and that really influenced the team and the performance. So I think the first component of finding that capacity, I do go back to that playbook of understanding the why and having that exec sponsorship, because you need to be able to demonstrate to the executive the strategic imperative of doing what you're going to do and the value that that's going to deliver to the organisation. That will help pave the way to freeing up capacity. Because people, let's face it, if someone come to you and you're managing a team and 10 people, and you've got a degree, a range of commitments to the organisation, and someone's come to you to say, hey, I need 2 people from you, right? And it's going to impact 20% of your capacity. You're going to probably be reluctant, right? So you need that imperative and sponsorship to be able to have those, negotiate that capacity to free up that capacity. But let's face it, if the organisation wants to invest, sees that as a strategic imperative and is willing to invest, they would therefore be willing to stop other work in order to commit towards that. And I think the other is freeing up capacity, is finding those low value activities that, let's face it, we're all doing. It exists in all businesses, those low value activities that we continue to do. So I think there's a couple of things there on freeing up the capacity. The product owner, look, it's a critical role. You need to ensure that in those critical roles, you've got the right people in the right role, people with the right aptitude. Even if they haven't got the agile experience, but they've got the willingness and, you know, they've got the skill and the will to adapt. If they haven't got that will, yeah, I personally would veto or would intervene to ensure that you don't make those bad decisions. There's a couple of key roles in any transformation, and I think that's one. You want to make sure you've got the right person in the right job.
Yeah, well, just on that, what are your thoughts on having external people that come in and sit in like a product role, a product owner role? That could be a new person joining the company, or it could be an external from a consultancy company or something like that that joins. So what are your views on that?
Yeah, look, I'll confess I always have a bias to having in residence expertise, and then complementing that with externals, be it agencies, consultants, etc. But that said, if that was your best option, providing it was an interim solution, and that external one had business context, you'd have to invest to ensure they've got the context of the business, and two, they would also upskill and mentor someone in the business to step into that role. So I think it's absolutely fine. I think the capability doesn't always exist, and it's a classic adage of the right person in the right role. I've been involved in many transformations where the people don't necessarily have the right expertise at the time they go into those roles, but they've got the aptitude to adapt and learn, and I think that's what it's about.
The other thing we're finding too is that you have to allow people to try the role and then say, actually, they want to go back onto the tools. They want to go into the work rather than be the product owner and lead the direction. Because when you're doing large scale transformation, a lot of people think that that's where they want to go. And some people land there and find that's not where they want to be. And so you've got to allow them a pleasant exit that isn't judgmental. Gave it a shot, better off over here. Yeah.
These are another great point, Joe, is in my experience, I don't think I've been involved in a large scale program where sometimes some of what you think are going to be your best product owners actually aren't right for that role. They either don't like it or they just weren't right. I've seen that in every program. And you also get those surprises, people who just grow into it and run with it and are bloody great at it.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to drop. Thanks so much, James.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening.
Thank you.
Could you say it again, please?
Any last questions before we wrap up? Cool. Thanks, James. I'll hand back to you, and thank you to everyone for coming out and sharing the evening with us. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that it was a 90 minutes that was really well spent, because we got a lot out of it. Thank you, James.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John.
Yeah. Thanks, James. Thanks, John and Michael, for hosting too.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, James.
Everybody.
Thanks, John, Michael, Arthur.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Oh, well.